even imagine. Church Hill, Richmond, Virginia. If you've never been there, picture this. Narrow row houses, packed tight like teeth in a jaw. Cracked sidewalks where the weeds have long since won the war against concrete. Chain-link fences rusting at the hinges. The smell of magnolia mixing with diesel from the freight trains that rumble through every night, around 2 in the morning, shaking the windows hard enough to rattle the dishes in the kitchen cabinet. That's where Byron grew up. Not in a house, in his grandmother's house. There's a difference, because the house didn't belong to him. Nothing really did. Claudette Patterson was 68 years old and built like a woman who had carried things heavier than groceries her whole life. She worked 3 days a week as a home health aide, bathing other people's parents, lifting other people's fathers out of wheelchairs, driving 40 minutes each way on a bus that was never on time. Her knees ached every morning. Her hands were rough and cracked at the knuckles. But her house, that narrow little row house with the peeling paint on the porch rail, was spotless. Every surface wiped, every cushion straight, every dish washed before bed. She raised Byron because nobody else would. His mother, Angela, died when he was 6. An aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms. Just a Tuesday afternoon when she didn't pick him up from school and a neighbor found her on the kitchen floor with the stove still on. Byron didn't understand it then. He understood it now. The way you understand a scar. You stop noticing it, but it never goes away. His father lasted about a year after that. Not because he died, because he disappeared. Packed a bag one Thursday while Claudette was at work and Byron was at school. Left a note on the counter that said, "I can't do this." 3 words. No return address. No phone call since. So it was just Byron and Claudette. A boy and his grandmother in a house with one working bathroom. A kitchen where the faucet dripped no matter how hard you twisted it. And the living room dominated by one thing. An upright piano. That piano was older than Byron, older than his mother. It had belonged to Claudette's sister, who'd passed it down before moving to Baltimore in the 90s. The keys were yellowed, like old paper. 2 of the black keys stuck if you pressed too hard. The tuning drifted flat every few months, and Claudette couldn't afford to get it fixed more than once a year. But she polished it every Sunday with lemon oil, the same way she polished the picture frames on the mantel. Because some things you take care of, not because they're valuable, but because they're yours. Byron first touched that piano when he was 4. Not because anyone told him to, because the sound pulled him. Claudette used to tell the story the same way every time. She was in the kitchen making rice, and she heard a single note from the living room, then another, then a third. She walked in and found Byron standing on his toes, reaching up to the keyboard, pressing keys one at a time with his index finger, his head tilted like he was listening for something specific. She didn't stop him. She just watched. The real teaching came from Rosemary Cole, 78 years old, pianist at Greater Hope Baptist Church for over 4 decades. Fingers bent with arthritis, but still faster than most people half her age. She noticed Byron during Sunday services, not because he was loud or restless like the other kids, because he was still, completely, unnervingly still. Sitting in the pew with his eyes half closed, his small body swaying slightly, absorbing every note like his skin was a microphone. After service one Sunday, Rosemary walked over to Claudette and said, "That boy doesn't just hear the music, he lives inside it." She started teaching him that same week. No method books, no theory sheets. She taught the way she'd learned, by ear, by feel, by repetition. Gospel first, then hymns, then spirituals. She'd play a passage once, and Byron would play it back. Not perfectly, not at first, but close, always close. And by the third try, exact. By the time he was 10, Byron could play any hymn in the Greater Hope songbook after hearing it once. By 12, he'd moved beyond what Rosemary could teach him. Not because she wasn't good enough, because his hunger was bigger than any one teacher could feed. That's when he found YouTube. On a phone with a cracked screen that Claudette had bought secondhand for $40, Byron discovered Chopin, then Debussy, then Rachmaninoff. He'd watch performances on that tiny screen, propped up on the piano's music stand, and teach himself the pieces, note by note. No sheet music, no conservatory, just a cracked phone, a busted piano, and hours, endless, stubborn, grinding hours, after school, after homework, after helping Claudette with dishes, until his fingers ached and his eyes burned. Rosemary came by one evening and heard him playing a Chopin nocturne through the screen door. She stood on the porch for a full minute before knocking. When Claudette let her in, Rosemary sat in the armchair and listened until he finished. Then she looked at Claudette with an expression that was equal parts wonder and sadness. "That boy doesn't just play the piano," she said. "He speaks through it." The sadness was because they both knew. Talent like that, in a place like this, without money, without connections, without a father, without a future anyone could see, talent like that usually goes quiet. It plays for church on Sundays, maybe a wedding here and there, and then life gets heavy and the music stops. But then something happened. Prescott Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in Richmond, launched a new initiative. They called it the Bridge Scholarship. One full ride spot per year for a student from an underserved community. Academics and an audition. Byron applied because Stephanie Aldridge, the school's music teacher, had heard a recording of him playing at a church fundraiser. She pushed his application through herself. He got in. And for 6 months, he survived. That's the right word. Survived. Not thrived, not belonged. Survived. He ate lunch alone at a table near the emergency exit. His uniform was second-hand, bought from the school's resale shop, always a size too big in the shoulders. He walked through hallways where conversations stopped when he approached, where eyes followed him like he was being tracked, where everything, from the marble floors to the brass door handles, seemed to whisper the same thing. This isn't for you. The school had a Steinway Model D concert grand in the music hall. $120,000 of hand-built precision. Byron walked past it every day on his way to history class. He never touched it. Not once. Because no one had ever told him he could. And Byron had learned a long time ago not to reach for things that weren't offered. Then the fall showcase was announced, an annual talent competition open to all students, judged by parents and faculty. The winner would receive a feature in the school's arts magazine and a recommendation letter for summer conservatory programs. Stephanie Aldridge found Byron in the practice room one afternoon, playing scales on a beat-up Yamaha keyboard with 3 dead keys. "Sign up for the showcase, Byron." He shook his head. "I don't think that's for me, Miss Aldridge." She pulled up a chair, sat next to him, didn't touch the keyboard. "The piano doesn't care who sits at the bench, Byron. It only cares what you bring." He signed up the next morning. His name went on the list, last slot, bottom of the page. And that single act, writing his name in pencil on a sheet of paper taped to a bulletin board, set off a chain of events that would reshape the future of Prescott Academy. If you think you know where this story is heading, trust me, you don't. Stay with me. Now let's talk about the man in the third row. Gerald Thornton didn't walk into Prescott Academy the night of the showcase. He arrived. There's a difference. Walking is what normal people do. Arriving is what happens when the room adjusts to you before you've said a word. He came through the front entrance at 6:45, 15 minutes before the doors officially opened. Silver hair swept back, not a strand out of place. A charcoal cashmere coat draped over his shoulders like a cape, not because it was cold, but because it looked expensive. Monogrammed cufflinks, GT, catching the light every time he moved his wrists. Italian shoes that clicked against the marble floor with the kind of rhythm that says, I own the ground beneath me. Two men flanked him. Donors. Board adjacent. The kind of men who laughed at Gerald's jokes half a second too fast and agreed with everything he said before he finished saying it. Principal Nolan Whitfield met him at the door personally. Not because it was required, because it was expected. Gerald shook his hand. Firm, lingering, 2 seconds longer than necessary. It wasn't a greeting. It was a leash. Whitfield smiled, the way people smile when they know who signs the checks. Gerald Thornton owned 11 commercial properties across Virginia, office buildings, retail plazas, a waterfront development in Norfolk that had made the business section of the Richmond Times-Dispatch twice in 1 year. His net worth wasn't public, but his influence was. He had donated over $200,000 to Prescott over the past decade. The music wing, the one with the Steinway, the soundproofed practice rooms, the concert-grade acoustics, bore a brass plaque by the entrance that read, The Thornton Family Music Center. His son Trent was a junior, 17. Tall like his father, same jawline, same posture. Trent had been playing piano since he was 5, private tutors, summer intensives, a Bosendorfer grand in the family living room that cost more than most people's cars. He was technically proficient. His fingers hit the right notes at the right times. But if you closed your eyes and listened, really listened, you'd hear something missing. There was no ache in his playing, no question, no hunger. Just precision, clean, polished, and completely forgettable. Gerald didn't see it that way. To Gerald, Trent was the heir. This was supposed to be his stage. But Gerald's influence at Prescott wasn't just about money. It was about philosophy. He sat on the advisory board, and he made sure everyone knew exactly where he stood. When the Bridge Scholarship was proposed 18 months earlier, Gerald was the only board member who voted against it. Not loudly, not with a speech, with a single paragraph in a written statement that Principal Whitfield read aloud at the meeting. I'm not against opportunity. I'm against lowering the bar and calling it compassion. That sentence did more work than a fist ever could. It sounded reasonable. It sounded principled. And it told every person in that room exactly who was welcome and who was being tolerated. When the scholarship was approved anyway, by a 6-1 vote, Gerald didn't protest. He didn't need to. He simply continued writing checks, continued showing up, continued occupying space in a way that made the walls bend toward him. Because Gerald understood something most people don't. You don't need to block a door if everyone already knows you disapprove of who's walking through it. The night of the showcase, Gerald picked up a program from the welcome table. He flipped through the list of performers casually, the way you flip through a magazine at a dentist's office. Cellist, vocal duet, violinist, Trent Thornton performing Debussy. Then his eyes stopped. Byron Patterson, solo piano. His expression didn't change much, just a slight tightening around the jaw, a shift in the eyes that moved from boredom to something sharper. He turned to Whitfield, who was still hovering nearby like a nervous satellite. I wasn't aware the scholarship included performance privileges. His voice was calm, almost friendly. Isn't the showcase traditionally reserved for students in the advanced music track? Whitfield stammered something about the event being open to all students this year. A new policy, broader participation, community building. Gerald listened without blinking. Then he folded the program, slipped it into his coat pocket, and said nothing else. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Later, backstage, Gerald found Trent warming up on a practice keyboard. He put a hand on his son's shoulder, not warm, not cold, just firm, and leaned in close. You've been preparing for 3 months. Don't let some sideshow distract you. This is your stage. Sideshow. He said it quietly, almost gently, but the word hung in the air like smoke after a match. Gerald Thornton had never lost anything to someone he considered beneath him. He had absolutely no intention of starting tonight. The backstage hallway at Prescott Academy smelled like floor polish and old curtains, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you home. Overhead, the stage lights hummed through the ceiling, a low, electric buzz that made everything feel like it was vibrating just beneath the surface. Byron stood in the corner near the fire exit, as far from the other performers as the hallway allowed. His dress shirt was white, ironed by Claudette that morning on a board she'd set up in the kitchen. The collar was slightly too wide. The cuffs came down past his wrists. He kept pulling them back, folding them once, then watching them slide down again. His hands were trembling. Not a lot, just enough that he noticed. 5 other students were backstage. A cellist tuning her strings with the calm of someone who'd done this 100 times. A vocal duo harmonizing softly in the corner, their matching dresses catching the fluorescent light. A violinist pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. And Trent Thornton. Trent sat on a folding chair near the stage door, a practice keyboard across his lap, running through Debussy's Clair de Lune with the easy confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether he belonged on the other side of that door. 2 friends stood beside him. One was scrolling through his phone. The other was laughing about something that had happened in calculus. Trent looked up as Byron adjusted his collar for the 3rd time. He studied him for a moment, the way you study something that confuses you, but doesn't threaten you. You're really doing this? Trent said. Not cruel, not kind, somewhere in between. Brave. The words sat in the air like a coin flipped and never caught. It could have meant anything, but they both knew what it meant. Foolish. Byron didn't answer. He just looked at the stage door and waited. The showcase began at 7 sharp. Principal Whitfield gave a 2-minute introduction that nobody remembered. Then the performances started. The cellist went first. Clean, technical, polite applause. The vocal duo followed. Good harmonies, a few pitch issues in the bridge, but the audience smiled through it. The violinist played a Bach partita with visible nerves and shaky vibrato. More polite applause. Then Trent Thornton walked out. The reaction was immediate. Gerald straightened in his seat. The 2 donors beside him leaned forward. The applause before Trent even played was louder than anything the previous 3 acts had received combined. Trent sat at the Steinway with practiced ease. Back straight, chin up. He played Debussy's Clair de Lune the way he'd been taught, accurately, cleanly, with dynamics that followed the score like a GPS following a route. Every note was where it was supposed to be. Every phrase shaped the way his tutor had shaped it for him. It was correct, It was competent, and when it was over, the audience clapped hard and long, not because the performance moved them, but because of the last name attached to the fingers. Gerald nodded once, satisfied, the way a man nods when the world is behaving exactly the way he's paid it to. Then the fifth performer, a flute player, took the stage for a brief handle piece. Solid, unremarkable. The audience was already reaching for their programs to check what came next. And what came next was the last name on the list. Our final performer this evening, Byron Patterson, solo piano. The shift was instant. Murmurs rippled from the back rows forward like wind through tall grass. A student in the fourth row whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Wait, seriously? Is this a joke? Two parents exchanged glances. A woman in the second row tilted her head the way people do when they're watching something they've already decided won't be good. Byron walked out from the wings. Undersized shirt, taped glasses, the only black student to set foot on that stage all night. Every step he took toward the Steinway added another layer of silence. Not the respectful kind, not the anticipatory kind, the kind that comes right before people decide whether to laugh. They decided fast. It started in the back, a snicker, then a chuckle from the middle section, then Gerald Thornton's voice, clear and unhurried, cutting from the third row like a blade across glass. What the hell is this doing near my piano? The laughter that followed wasn't nervous anymore. It was open, full. 300 people, and not one of them said stop. Byron reached the bench. He didn't sit down, not yet. He stood there and looked at Gerald Thornton, straight at him, not angry, not scared, just still.
Thornton smirked, leaned toward the parent beside him and flicked his hand, that slow, lazy wave like brushing away something that didn't matter. Go back to whatever hood you crawled out of, son. This instrument has standards your bloodline can't meet. The room laughed again, louder this time, comfortable now. Permission had been granted. Byron looked at him 1 second longer. Then he said it, quiet, steady, 3 words that landed like stones dropped into still water.
You done, sir? The laughter cracked. Just for a second, just long enough for something to shift. Then Byron sat down. Yo, nah. A grown man just called a kid dirty blood in front of 300 people, and they laughed. Like that's normal? Man, imagine that's you up there. You walking away or sitting down.
Byron's hands rested on his knees, palms down, fingers still.
The laughter was fading, but it hadn't stopped. It lingered in the corners of the room like cigarette smoke, thin, bitter, everywhere. He could feel it on his skin, on the back of his neck, behind his eyes. His mind went where it always went when things got heavy. Walk away. That was the voice. The quiet one. The one that had kept him alive at Prescott for 6 months. The one that told him to eat lunch by the emergency exit. The one that told him not to touch the Steinway. The one that said, every single day, don't reach for things that aren't yours. Walk away. Save yourself. Nobody here wants to hear you play. Nobody here thinks you can. And if you try and fail, if your fingers slip, if your mind goes blank, if the music doesn't come, then the laughter won't just be tonight. It'll follow you through every hallway, every classroom, every morning for the rest of your time at this school. Walk away. His left hand twitched. Then another voice came, softer, older, smelling like lemon furniture polish and peppermint. Rosemary. He could see her living room, the lace curtains, the sunlight cutting through the dust, her hands over his, wrinkled, warm, impossibly steady, pressing his fingers into the keys the way a gardener presses seeds into soil. Music isn't about proving anything, baby. It's about telling the truth. He could hear her, not the memory of her, right now, right here, sitting in the chair beside him the way she always did, one hand on his shoulder, the other tapping the rhythm on her knee. Then he thought about Claudette. She was somewhere behind him, back of the auditorium. He didn't need to turn around to know. She had taken 3 buses to get here tonight. She was wearing her good dress, the navy one, with the small white flowers that she only wore to church and funerals and things that mattered. She had ironed his shirt this morning without being asked. She had packed his dress shoes in a plastic bag so they wouldn't scuff on the bus. She had never, not once, not in 14 years, told him he couldn't. Byron looked down at the keys, 88 of them, black and white. No opinion, no prejudice, no last name. Just physics and wood and wire and whatever you were brave enough to pour into them. He placed his fingers on the ivory. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at Gerald Thornton. He closed his eyes, and he whispered, so quiet that only the piano could hear him. This isn't for them, Grandma. This is for us. His fingers pressed down. The first note was wrong, not in pitch, not in timing, but in expectation. Because the sound that came out of that Steinway wasn't what anyone in that auditorium was prepared to hear. It was quiet, almost fragile. A single phrase from Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, played so softly that the back rows leaned forward just to catch it. Byron's fingers trembled on the keys. You could see it from the 5th row. A slight shake in his right hand, a hesitation between the second and third notes that made the phrase feel like it might collapse. Gerald Thornton leaned back, crossed his arms. The half-smile returned. A parent in the 6th row raised an eyebrow. A student near the aisle pulled out his phone. The room was settling into its verdict before the first passage was finished. He's choking. That's what every single one of them thought. But what sounded like hesitation was intention. What looked like trembling was restraint. Byron was doing exactly what Rosemary Cole had taught him, starting from vulnerability, beginning the conversation with a whisper. Don't shout at the piano, baby. Start soft. Start honest. And when the music trusts you, then you can fly. The opening passage ended. 2 seconds of silence. Byron's shoulders dropped. His back straightened, not stiff, but aligned, like a tree finding its center after the wind stops. The second movement began. The Chopin unfolded into its complex passages, and something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, just a tilt. The way a weather vane turns when the breeze changes, and nobody notices until they look up. Byron's right hand found its steadiness. The trembling was gone. His fingers moved with a precision that was almost architectural. Every note placed exactly where it needed to be. Every dynamic calibrated with the kind of control that doesn't come from tutors or summer intensives. It comes from 10,000 hours on a busted upright with 2 sticky keys and a cracked phone screen propped against the music stand. The parent put her hand down. The student locked his phone. A teacher by the window turned and stared at the stage. Stephanie Aldridge gripped the doorframe by the side exit, knuckles white. Not from fear, from recognition. She had heard Byron on that terrible Yamaha keyboard. She had known he was good. She had not known he was this. The Chopin cascaded, right hand flying through 16th notes like water over river stones, left hand carrying a bass melody underneath so deep and steady it felt less like music and more like a heartbeat. Crescendos built and released with the timing of someone who understood that music isn't just about the notes, it's about the space between them. A mother in row 7 forgot she was holding her phone. A father 2 seats from Gerald leaned forward, mouth open. A girl in the front row pressed her hand against her chest. Gerald's arms were still crossed. But the half smile was gone. Then, 3 minutes in, Byron did something nobody expected. He finished the Chopin passage. The last note hung in the air like a question mark. The audience waited for him to lift his hands, to stand, to accept polite applause. He didn't stop. His left hand shifted 2 octaves down, and a new sound began. It wasn't Chopin anymore. It wasn't anything printed on sheet music. It was Byron. The melody started with a gospel phrase, simple, ancient, aching, the sound of Rosemary Cole's hands on a Sunday morning. Claudette humming while she folded laundry at midnight. Church Hill, the trains, the creaking porches, the laughter through screen doors on summer nights. But it didn't stay there. Jazz harmonics crept in, minor sevenths, blue notes that bent the air like heat off pavement. Classical structure returned, wrapping around the jazz like vine climbing a wall. The left hand laid down pure blues, raw, heavy, rooted. The right hand wove ornaments above it, Chopin and gospel, and something entirely new, braided into a sound that had no name and needed none. The auditorium changed. You could feel it. People weren't listening anymore. They were inside it. The music wasn't performing for them. It was happening to them. Then Byron brought it down. The runs thinned to a single melodic line. The left hand went quiet. The right hand played a phrase so simple it sounded like a child picking out notes for the first time. Except every note was chosen with the precision of a surgeon. Then silence. His hands hovered above the keys, not touching, suspended like held breath. The auditorium was so quiet you could hear the heating system clicking through the vents. A program rustled in the back. Someone swallowed. 3 seconds of nothing. Gerald's arms had uncrossed. He didn't remember doing it. His hands pressed into his thighs, fingers gripping the fabric. The smugness was gone. The confidence was gone. 1 second more. Then Byron struck. The final movement detonated. His hands came down with a force that sent a shockwave through the room, a thunderous eruption fusing classical virtuosity with raw, percussive gospel energy. His body moved with the music, swaying, leaning, head tilted back, eyes closed, jaw set. His fingers moved at a speed that shouldn't have been possible, runs climbing the entire keyboard and diving back, chords stacking 5 and 6 notes deep, rhythms shifting time signatures mid-phrase like a river jumping its banks. The Steinway roared. The sound filled every corner, vibrated in rib cages, rattled programs and laps, pressed against the walls like it was trying to escape. A father in the back row stood up. His body just did it. His wife looked at him, then at the stage, and stood too. Claudette sat in the second to last row, both hands pressed to her chest, tears running in 2 straight lines. She didn't wipe them. She just watched her grandson become something the world had tried to tell him he couldn't be. Trent stood in the wings, mouth open, hands at his sides. No jealousy, just astonishment, pure, unguarded. the kind that rewrites everything you thought you knew. The final chord rang out, massive, resonant, filling the room the way sunlight fills a cathedral, everywhere at once, impossible to ignore. Byron lifted his hands, placed them back on his knees, palms down, fingers still, exactly where they started. Silence. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing but the dying vibration of the strings, fading like the last light of a sunset. Then a single clap. Stephanie Aldridge, by the side door, hands coming together, fast, sharp, almost desperate. Then another, row 12, then row 6, then the back, then the middle. Then the room exploded. This wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the measured clapping that followed the cellist or Trent's perfectly adequate Debussy. This was visceral, uncontrolled. 300 people hit by something they didn't know they needed and couldn't pretend they hadn't felt. Students leaped up. Parents stood, hands over mouths, wiping eyes, shaking heads. The ovation built and built and did not stop. Byron remained seated. He opened his eyes, looked past the standing bodies, past the clapping hands, past Gerald Thornton's rigid silhouette, and found Claudette. Back row, navy dress, white flowers, hands on her chest. She nodded. Once. Small. Just for him. That was enough. The ovation didn't fade. It grew. It rolled through the auditorium in waves, cresting, dipping, surging again like the room couldn't let go. Students who had laughed 3 minutes ago were on their feet, clapping until their palms stung. A woman in row 4 was crying openly. A man near the aisle kept whispering the same thing. My God. My God. This wasn't applause. This was confession. Every person standing knew they had been part of the laughter. They had heard Gerald's voice, heard the word bloodline, and done nothing. Now they were all standing, but for a very different reason. Stephanie Aldridge walked to the stage, not because anyone asked, because she couldn't stop herself. She placed her hand on Byron's shoulder, didn't speak. The piano had said everything. Then the room shifted, slowly, collectively, toward the third row. Gerald Thornton was the only person still sitting, jaw locked, fingers gripping the armrests the way you grip something when the ground is moving and you need to believe it isn't. Eyes fixed on nothing. The stare of a man whose world had just cracked, and he was trying to hold the pieces together in front of 300 witnesses. The donors beside him were standing, clapping. They hadn't looked at Gerald. His wife glanced at him. Her expression wasn't anger. It was worse. The quiet, exhausted recognition of someone who had watched this version of her husband for years and just saw the moment it stopped working. Trent stood in the wings. He turned and looked toward the auditorium, not at Byron, at his father. And for the first time, what crossed his face wasn't admiration or loyalty. It was disappointment in Gerald. Gerald stood, buttoned his coat. One button, precise. The gesture of a man who wants the world to believe he's choosing to leave, not being pushed out. He stepped into the aisle and moved toward the exit. But the room was standing. The aisle was narrow, and he had to squeeze past people too busy clapping to move, or too aware to bother. As he passed the edge of the stage, Byron spoke, not loud, not sharp, just clear enough. The piano didn't ask my name, sir. It only asked if I had something to say. Gerald stopped. One step, half a breath. He looked at Byron. Maybe truly looked at him for the first time all night. Then he kept walking. The doors closed behind him with a soft click that sounded, in that beat between ovations, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The room erupted again. Not for the music this time. For the boy. The auditorium emptied slowly that night. Not because people had nowhere to go, because they didn't want to leave. Byron stood backstage near the fire exit. Same spot, same too wide collar, same taped glasses. But the hallway was full now. Students he'd never spoken to were introducing themselves. A girl from his history class touched his arm and said, "I'm sorry I never talked to you before." A sophomore he'd seen in the cafeteria every day for 6 months shook his hand and held it a beat too long. A father who worked in arts education handed Byron a business card. Didn't give a speech, just said, "When you're ready, call me." Byron slid it into his shirt pocket. Then Trent Thornton appeared. The hallway got quieter. Not silent, just adjusted. The way a room shifts when two people are about to have a conversation that matters. Trent extended his hand. "I've been playing since I was 5. I've never heard anything like that." Byron shook it. No words, no grand moment. Just two boys connected for 3 seconds by the only thing that had ever mattered in that building. Then Claudette found him. Navy dress, white flowers, good shoes, the ones that pinched but she wore anyway because tonight was a night for good shoes. Eyes still red, hands steady. She took his face in both hands, palms on his cheeks. The way she'd held him when he was 5 and scraped his knee. The way she'd held him when he was 8 and asked why his father left. Same hands, different boy. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you." Claudette Patterson never said the obvious thing when a better one was available. Rosemary would have stomped her feet. Byron laughed. Real, unguarded. Maybe the first real laugh he'd had inside Prescott Academy. Within a week, things shifted. Stephanie Aldridge moved Byron into the advanced music track. Principal Whitfield expanded the Bridge Scholarship from 1 spot to 3. Gerald Thornton's name stayed on the plaque, but his voice on the board grew quieter. Fewer meetings, fewer calls returned. Nothing dramatic, just the slow erosion that happens when a room full of people has seen the same thing and can't unsee it. 3 weeks later, Byron found a letter on the kitchen table. Thick envelope, cream paper, Eastman School of Music, Rochester, New York. An invitation to audition for their summer program. Inside, a handwritten note from a faculty member who'd seen a video of his performance, uploaded by a student, viewed 11,000 times in 19 days. "We don't often write to applicants before auditions, but we wanted you to know we're listening." Byron read it twice, slid it across the table to Claudette, who was making cornbread. She wiped her hands, read it slowly, set it down, went back to stirring. A long silence. "Well, you better practice." Byron Patterson didn't become famous overnight. There was no record deal waiting in the wings, no talent agent rushing backstage with a contract. That's not how this works. That's not how it's ever worked for kids like Byron. But something did change. Not the world, the room. One room, one night, one boy who was told his bloodline didn't meet the standards of an instrument made of wood and wire, and answered with the only language that couldn't be interrupted, couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be shooed away with a wave of a cashmere sleeve. The music. Talent exists everywhere. In row houses with leaky faucets, in churches with out-of-tune pianos, in the fingers of kids who teach themselves Chopin on cracked phone screens because nobody thought they were worth a lesson. Talent is never the problem. The problem is the rooms. Who gets in? Who gets heard? And who stands up when a man in the third row tells a child he doesn't belong? That's the real question this story asks. Not whether Byron could play. He always could. The question is, how many Byrons are out there right now, sitting in hallways, eating lunch alone, walking past pianos they've never been invited to touch? And what are we going to do about it? If this story moved you, send it to someone who needs to hear it today, not tomorrow, today. Because somewhere, right now, there's a kid standing at the edge of a stage, deciding whether to sit down or walk away. And maybe, just maybe, hearing this story is the thing that makes them. Every week, we bring you stories of people who were underestimated and refused to stay silent. This is what we do here, and we're just getting started. Next week, a janitor walks into a boardroom. What he says in 90 seconds changes the future of a billion-dollar company. You don't want to miss that one. Now, have you ever been in a room where everyone had already decided who you were before you said a single word? Tell me about it. I read every one. The screen fades. One last image. Byron, alone in Claudette's living room, late at night. The old upright piano, a single lamp. He plays softly, not for an audience, not for a scholarship, not to prove anything, just for himself. Part 3. Bro, this story's fake. But that pain? That's real. Every single day. And here's the thing. How many Byrons out there never even got to sit down at that piano? Think talk.